Hello, my name is Graham Clark. I'm a Canadian home inspector, professional engineer, and expert witness in the fields of construction and home inspection. This is the first of 3 videos in which I'm going to talk about one particular case that came out of Alberta actually a little over 20 years ago. But even though it's old, there's still a lot of points which are relevant today and things that we can learn from as home inspectors. In this video, I want to talk about the actual home inspection itself. What did the inspector do? What did the inspector write in their inspection report? Did they meet the duty of care expected of a home inspector? And if not, how? What were the problems? In the second video, we'll look at how we actually determine what negligence is. I'm going to touch on that just a little bit here, but we're going to get into a more in-depth conversation in the second video. And in the third video, we're going to talk once again about some contractual issues, especially the limit of liability that was in the inspection contract. So let's have a look at this case. This is known as Duncan versus Carson. Again, it's a 2000 decision of the Alberta Provincial Court. And it's between the Duncans and Mr. Carson. The Duncans are the buyers of the property. They're the ones who hired a home inspector to do the home inspection. Mr. Carson is the inspector. This case involves the quality of materials used to cover the roof on a home located at 502 Burton Close, purchased in Edmonton by the plaintiffs. The home was purchased in September of 1997, and the timing of this is important. In the negotiations leading up to the purchase of the home, the plaintiffs hired the defendant, a home inspector, to report on the status of the property, and the experienced home inspector completed the report and delivered it to them at a cost of $225 plus GST prior to the closing of the purchase. Fair enough, so we know what this is all about. The most important issues with respect to this lawsuit and the home inspection are what is written in the report. In referring to the actual report itself, says the judge, the report is lengthy and fairly comprehensive, being some 13 pages in length. It makes reference to many aspects of the property, including inter alia. Inter alia is just fancy lawyer words for among other things. Among other things, landscaping, the garage, the exterior, the interior, all mechanical aspects of the home. The report also makes the following references to the roof. On page 1, reference is made to the garage roof as follows. Cedar, okay, good application. Note, the lifting shakes can be replaced. Reset staples to ridge. No restriction to a full lifespan. I'm going to come back to that. On page 2 of the report, under the terms house exterior, the report also makes reference to the following under the category of the roof materials. Cedar, okay. No restriction to full lifespan. Note, minor repairs to all areas of roof, odd lifting shakes. Secure all staples to the ridge. Jensen Roofing to repair next week. Unable to determine the invoice responsibility. Okay, well, there's a couple of things worth discussing here. Honestly, and I've been a home inspector for a long time, over 30 years as a matter of fact, some of the things in this, I don't know what they mean. What are they intended to mean? What information was the inspector trying to communicate? No restriction to a full lifespan. What does that mean? If, for example, these shakes are 7 years old, is a normal lifespan 7 years? Is it 30 years? Is it 20 years? And we're going to talk about this later on. But what does that mean? What information would that give a home buyer? No restriction to a full lifespan. There are some spelling errors here. Also, it indicates that Jensen Roofing is to repair next week, unable to determine the invoice responsibility. I'm not entirely sure why the home inspector would be commenting on that, and I would probably avoid it. But we're going to talk more about some of the things that are written in here and some of the things which are not written in here. Continuing, Mr. Duncan, the buyer, stated he was very relieved to be told by the home inspector that the roof was cedar. He believed his cedar roof was much superior to other types of roof. Indeed, Mr. Duncan told the court he didn't have any further occasion to give it any thought until the fall of 1998, which is, a year later. During the fall of '98, The problems with pine shake roofs in the Edmonton area began surfacing in the media. Many expensive horror stories were exposed, causing Mr. Duncan concern. In fact, further concern was raised in Mr. Duncan's mind when roofers began to appear literally at the plaintiff's doorstep saying, "Hey, you want to get your roof replaced?" At first, the plaintiffs, the owners of the house now, did not give this much thought, but he's got a nagging suspicion. And it says here a roofer was hired to complete an inspection. This roofer, Mr. Henkel, gave evidence at the trial. Now, I'm not entirely sure that Mr. Henkel was actually a roofer. What it says in the next paragraph is that Mr. Henkel told the court that he operated a home inspection business under the name of Pillar to Post. Mr. Henkel testified that he'd been a home inspector since November of 1996. So it sounds like he wasn't really a roofer. It sounds like he was a home inspector. The judge may have got that a bit wrong. At any rate, he testified that on January 12, 1998, he took his first course on pine shakes as a roofing material in the Edmonton area. The course was 2 days long and covered various aspects of the history of pine shakes, and in particular, problems with pine shakes being experienced in the Alberta market. Pine shakes were shown to be rotting in the Alberta markets because this particular wood product was susceptible to a specific fungus growth that would cause the shakes to break down and ultimately lift from the roof. I, the judge, am satisfied that this course taken by Mr. Henkel helped him to identify many of the signs of the pine shake deterioration. One of the most important signs of deterioration was physical evidence of the pine shake turning a darker color. Mr. Henkel also testified if the shakes in question were made of pine and were to stay wet for extended periods of time, they would begin to prematurely rot or physically deteriorate. This sign was also evident on the roof in question. Now let's think about that in terms of timing. This is a course that he took January 12, 1998. The original home inspection was done in September of 1997, so these two are pretty close in time. It seems to me that if home inspectors, like Mr. Henkel, are taking courses about well-known defects in pine roofs in January of 1998, maybe it's reasonable to expect that a home inspector in September of 1997 would have been aware that there were issues with pine shakes in that area. We'll come back to that. Mr. Henkel, that second home inspector, was the only person with any roofing experience who actually physically inspected the plaintiff's shakes. What about the original home inspector? Well, it says here, Mr. Carson admittedly did not do so, but limited his inspection to a visual inspection of the roof from ground level. Paragraph 8, Mr. Henkel just indicates he sees a lot of rot in about 30% of the shakes, and that maybe 50% of the shakes were infected with the fungus. Fair enough. Mr. Henkel, that second inspector, said he thinks it's likely that in September 97, when the original inspection was done, the roof in question would have been less than 2 years old. It turns out, actually, the roof was about 7 years old because the house was built in 1990. And there were some pictures that pictures clearly indicate darkened areas on the roof of the home, and these were pictures that came from around September 1997. So somebody brought in evidence showing the house, maybe pictures taken during listing or something like that, that actually showed dark areas of the shakes. So without any doubt, the court accepts the evidence that within 10 years of the pine shake installation on the home in question, the pine shakes would have had to be totally replaced due to the breakdown of the wood materials. So these were installed probably in 1990, and probably would have needed to be replaced by the year 2000. Mr. Duncan, the home buyer, now the homeowner, produced a proposal from Jensen Roofing. Remember, that was the company that was mentioned in the home inspector's report, that says they looked at the roof in 1997. Again, this is consistent with what the home inspector said in their report. And Jensen Roofing actually said, they give a quote, in 1997, to tear off and haul away the existing pine shakes. supply and install new cedar shingles per the Alberta Building Code, and that was going to cost $10,000. So they also gave a quote to put down asphalt shingles instead of cedar, which is going to be $44.50. And this is in Alberta small claims court, and the limit that you can claim is $7,500. So to stay within the jurisdiction of a small claims court, the buyers have basically they're just capping their. They say, yeah, we know the most we're going to get is $7,500 here, even though we've experienced a $10,000 loss, which we'll talk about later. We're just going to limit it to $7,500. All right, what does the home inspector say about this? Mr. Carson admits that he did a home inspection on September 9th. However, Mr. Carson, during the course of the trial, pointed to the fact that the multiple listing service highlight sheet associated with the sale of the home clearly pointed out that the roof was covered with cedar. When it came time for him to complete the on-site inspection report, Mr. Carson admitted he did not climb onto the roof and personally inspect the wood. However, he could clearly see that roof repairs were necessary through his visual inspection, and he made reference to those repairs, bringing the necessity of those to the plaintiff's attention. The home inspector's position was that the specific reference to cedar shakes made in the MLS sheet, this did not require him to climb on the roof and physically inspect the shingles in question to ensure they were made of cedar. So the MLS listing said they were cedar. What, that relieves the home inspector of any obligation to figure that out for themselves? I'm not sure I agree with that. As a matter of fact, I definitely do not agree with that. The position taken by the home inspector was that because, well, look, I said the shakes needed repair, I've said all I really need to say. Mr. Carson told the court that when he referred to the roofing materials during his inspection, he just called them shakes, and at no time did he say they were cedar shakes. But he also admitted, he didn't say they were pine shakes either. He just said they were shakes. But as we have already seen, he wrote in the report twice that they were cedar. Okay, we're going to skip down past the liability issues. So let's get down to number one of the legal issues here. Did the defendant make a negligent misrepresentation? Are they liable for negligence? And there's something called the Cognos test, which is going to be the subject of the next video, and we'll talk about how that works. But part of the Cognos test in determining negligent misrepresentation is that you have to make a representation which is inaccurate, untrue, or misleading. That's one of the things that people have to prove. And in this case, well, the home inspector said they were cedar, they are pine. So it's inaccurate. Now, home inspector is allowed to have something inaccurate as long as the conclusion didn't come to them negligently. And so, did he have a good reason to think they were cedar? Well, the reason he thought they were cedar is it said so on the MLS sheet. I'm going to agree with where the judge is going to go on this, which is going to be that, that is not a home inspector doing their duty. Home inspector reading off an MLS sheet is not a home inspection. So the judge says, without any doubt, the representations made to the client that the roofing material was made from cedar was inaccurate. I think we all have to agree with that. In light of the fact that the defendant made such a representation without gaining access to the roof in question to personally inspect the roofing material was negligent or careless. And I think that's right. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I'm going to show you the house. Further, in my view, it would be unconscionable for any inspector to rely on what amounts to a representation made in a multiple listing information sheet without more information presented to such an inspector regarding the accuracy of this information. So yeah, you don't write your report based on what the MLS sheet says or the feature sheet. So what happens is that the judge eventually says, yep, look, the inspector was at fault. For other reasons, I'm going to talk about the liability of the limitation of liability clause that was in the contract was not upheld. We'll discuss that in the third video. The judge is going to award the plaintiff damages. What damages are they to be awarded? And there's a bunch of different ways you can award damages here. What the court in this case said was that cedar roof has a life expectancy of between 30 to 40 years, and actually it was the home inspector being sued that suggested that's the typical life of a cedar roof. So we're going to call it 35 years, says the judge. And the judge says, look, yeah, I admit that the home inspector did say they needed some repairs, and nobody brought any evidence forward to say how much those repairs would cost. So the judge just kind of guessed at $1,000. All right, so $1,000 is kind of a gimme in that case. And, you know, if the life expectancy of a 35-year roof, or life expectancy of a cedar roof is about 35 years, and if the house was 7 years old, you know something, you didn't expect as the buyer to be getting a brand new roof with 35 years of a life remaining. You expected to get a 7-year-old roof with 35 minus 7, with 20% of the roof life gone. And then you expected you were probably going to have to put $1,000 into it. So what the judge did was looked at the $10,000 as the total cost to get a new roof, depreciated it for 7 years, which was 20%, and then gave the home inspector basically credit for the $1,000 worth of stuff that they did identify. And that comes down to $7,286.08. Interestingly, less than $300 difference between that number and what the jurisdiction of the small claims court was. So the most they could have got was $7,500. They got $7,286 plus costs of $750. So let's take a look at a couple of the elements. First, we'll take a look at the house, and here's the house. This is actually the house as it existed, let's see, in June 2009. And interestingly, you can see it's got asphalt shingles on it. So they got the $7,000, basically $8,000 worth of money, paid their lawyer, and then spent $4,000 to put an asphalt shingle roof on. $44.50, I think, was the quote. And so they actually made some money out of it. And interesting, you can see there kind of a gray looking shingle. And if we turn around, look at a house across the street, we can see a roof with wood shingles on it. But this is the one that we were inspecting. We can look at it in 2012. Interestingly, if we look at it in 2014, I'm not sure those are the same shingles. It may just be that the lighting is different, but they actually look brown to me. Anyway, that doesn't really matter. And really the fact that they put asphalt on doesn't matter either. Here is what matters. I'm not sure that I expect a home inspector to be getting up and actually walking on a wood shake roof. Easy to damage the shakes, especially in the condition that they seem to have been in. But at the very least, is it reasonable to expect a home inspector to get out their ladder and put it up against the edge of this roof? I think yes. I can't see any reason why not. Any home inspector should be able to carry a ladder that's going to be able to get them up to the edge of that roof. Right? Maybe not the upper parts, but you don't really need to identify the material. And the second issue is, like, what about the weather conditions? Maybe it was covered with snow, something like that. Well, it wasn't. It was September in Edmonton. And if we look at the weather records, the high of the day was 25.5 degrees. The weather was clear, mainly clear, mostly cloudy. No rain, no snow, good temperature, no real weather limitations there. So that's one of the issues. Now, you'll notice, and it may have been elsewhere in the report, but according to the various standards of practice that we work to, and let me just pull up, for example, the standards of practice of the Canadian Association of Home and Property Inspectors, the CAPI standards. And these basically, this is the current version, but it would have said pretty much the same thing in 1997. The ASHI standards would have said this. The words may have been slightly different, but fundamentally it would have been all the same stuff. What are the things that the inspector is required to put in the inspection report? Well, at B, you can say we have to describe the roof coverings. At C, we have to report the methods used to inspect the roof. And I don't know, because I haven't seen the report, It certainly didn't say so in the inspection report or in the decision, but it didn't identify how the inspector inspected the roof. Maybe if they had told their clients, hey, we only inspected the roof by standing on the ground and looking at it, not a very good inspection, that might have mitigated things a little bit. I don't think so, really. I think it's a realistic expectation to expect that inspector to be getting up to, at the very least, the edge of that roof. And it says the inspector shall describe the roof coverings. Well, one of the things that I often see people do wrong is people over-describe stuff. And I wonder in this case, let me just switch over to, I'm just going to switch over to a report writing system here. We're going to look at Horizon. And you can see here, these are the standard descriptions of sloped roofing materials that we have in Horizon. We have asphalt shingles, we have composition shingles, wood shakes, or just generically wood shakes or shingles. You know, I concede that there is the possibility that it may not have been possible for the home inspector to actually specifically say these were cedar or these were pine. But I expect that that inspector probably, definitely, could have been able to tell the difference between something that was wood and something that was not wood if they got up to the edge of the roof. And if you know that they're wood, just say that they're wood. I think there's a good chance that the home inspector in this case did himself a disservice by calling them specifically cedar. Like, if you're not sure, why go out on a limb? They might have been white oak. I mean, who knows what they were? They were definitely wood. I see home inspectors over-describe things too much. The more specific you are about something, the more likely you are going to be wrong about it. Not that you're definitely going to be wrong, but you got a greater chance of being wrong if you're more specific about it. The more general you are about it, the less likely you are going to be wrong about it. Interestingly, I want to point out that although this is a requirement of most of the standards of practice that you will see, the CAPI standards, the ASHI standards, all these different standards usually say that we have to describe the roofing materials. One of the newest standards, which is the CSA A770 home inspection standard, doesn't even require you to describe anything at all. Deficiencies, yes, but describing materials, taking that inventory of the house, which I'm not sure there is a huge amount of value in. You can debate me on that. But you don't have to do it according to that standard of practice at all. If you want to, great, go right ahead. But don't over-describe things. If this inspector had simply said wood shingles, wood shakes, maybe they wouldn't have got into trouble. I can only speculate, but I could have made a better case for the inspector. Now, one of the other issues is, should the inspector have known about this fungus, this rot issue with pine shakes at the time of the inspection? Well, I don't know for sure. I was not practicing as a home inspector in Edmonton at that time. Certainly the evidence seems to suggest that if wood companies are putting on seminars for home inspectors about rotting pine in January of 1998, there's a good chance that it was kind of a well-known thing in the market in September of 1997. And I found this article talking about pine in Alberta in general. Thousands of untreated pine shake roofs were installed on new homes in Alberta between 89 and, interestingly, 97. By 1996, homeowners in Edmonton had discovered that their untreated pine shake roofs were starting to rot in as little as 4 to 7 years. Well, that's interesting. This is a 1997 home inspection on a 7-year-old house. Things are really lining up. This roof probably didn't look very good. Investigation of this problem revealed that certain fungi were infecting shakes on the roofs via airborne spores. This fungus is resistant to the high temperatures and cyclical wetting and drying of a roof. In 1998, Alberta put a requirement for preservative treatment of all pine shakes into its building code. In 1999, CSA published a standard regarding pressure treatment of shakes. However, these measures were too late to save the pine shake industry, which completely collapsed. This paper covers, well, that doesn't matter. Anyway, the point is, just reading this, it seems that in around 1996 and 97, there was a lot of activity. And over the space of 2 years, all of a sudden everybody started to realize, hey, these things are rotting. And the installation of, looks like, untreated pine shake stopped in 96. And new codes were published in 1998. Seems like it was an active issue that a home inspector really should have known about. Now again, I wasn't doing home inspections in Edmonton at the time, and so I can't really speak to that. But I think there is definitely the possibility that a home inspector would have been expected to know about these types of issues. So what are the lessons to be learned here? Well, in terms of the actual conduct of the inspection, don't rely on the MLS sheet or the feature sheet or what anybody tells you. Go look for yourself. Make sure that it's true. Do your normal job. Don't be lazy. Certainly I might read a feature sheet, and if it confirms my observations, well, that's great. But I'm not going to rely on it to make my representations. I'm being paid to look at something. I'm going to go look at it and make my own decisions. The second is just conduct of the inspection itself. In this case, the inspector just looked at the roof from the ground. Now, in some cases, that is all you can do. But in this case, I can pretty clearly see that somebody could put a ladder up to the bottom edge of that roof and get closer and inspect the roof, maybe from a couple of points around the house. Get a much closer look at the shingles. There's a very good chance, I think, that the inspector would have been able to see rot in the shingles if they'd looked close up. Something else you might have seen from the picture was that there's several windows. Just looking out those windows probably would have given you a better inspection than looking at the roof from the ground level. So there were a lot of opportunities to do this inspection better. And you're going to be held to that standard. We're going to talk about, as I say, negligence and what the standard is in another video. But you can trust me, most home inspectors are going to say they would have looked at that roof better than this home inspector did. And the other issue that I can't really comment on, but is the value of education. It may be that this inspector didn't have any knowledge or understanding of the pine issue in Alberta. Maybe that's the case, maybe not. Maybe they should have, maybe not. It's tough for me to say. But in this case, if they had brought in other home inspectors, in this case they actually did bring in another home inspector that said, look, I'm a home inspector. I'm aware of this issue. This would have looked basically the same in 1997. And any reasonable home inspector should have been able to tell that. That would be pretty damning to the inspector. So education is very important. That's why continuing education credits are really important. Make sure you get your education. Don't just sit on your laurels for 20 years. You got your RHI designation or whatever designation you've got many years ago. You got to keep up on things. You got to go know what's new and changing in the market. And I think the last lesson is a pretty important one. Don't over-report. Don't be overly specific. If you don't have to say something, maybe you don't say it. Maybe you don't have to make that commentary about Jensen Roofing coming to look in there and you can't determine the invoice responsibility. Why are you even bothering? And if it's sufficient to say wood, why would you say cedar or western red cedar or something like that? Just be general when doing your inspections. Anyway, that's my advice. Those are some things that hopefully can help keep you out of trouble. If you agree, great, let me know. If you disagree, let me know as well. Happy to look at all comments. Anyway, stay tuned for the next video, and we'll talk about what negligence really means. We'll see you then.